Right, well, here we are again. I think it's pretty much time now to start working on some of the plumbing around the engine bay. So we're going to start with the cooling system, which is fairly straightforward on this one. The only change is, or a slight cock up on my half, is I bought a new radiator for it, the same as before. So I bought a radiator for it, another Nissan stock 306 radiator, because I sold the old one off. It all turned up and everything, and then I kind of promptly remembered that actually I couldn't use that this time around because the sort of primary turbo there, if you fit the radiator, the top hose outlet on the radiator ends up pointing basically directly in the inlet of the turbo, which is not what you want, and there's certainly no way that there's any way to sort of get a pipe around that. So I decided I'd have to run a slightly shorter radiator, the idea being I'm hopefully going to tuck the air filter down alongside the radiator, because it was up on the wing before, which was always a bodge. It didn't fit properly and it couldn't get any air up there at all other than cooking hot air off the turbos, so most of the time it ran with no air filter at all, which as you can imagine isn't really ideal. So I've done some measuring up and trying to find a radiator. We come down to, actually it was either the one like I had fitted to the 305, which is out of a Fiat, or a Fiesta radiator, and I took preference over the Fiesta radiator because it does actually have the lower hose that sticks out off the left hand side like the factory radiator does. I still use that factory hose that comes around the back of the motor, really because it's just convenient on 306. All the clips are there and it's out the way. There's actually less room over the top here to bring that hose round like on the more modern engines, although generally I prefer the ones that come over the top because it's a lot easier to take the engine out when everything comes up over the top. So we're going to carry on using that lower hose on this particular setup hopefully. Obviously I'll have to chop the end off it because the new radiator would have just got a normal barbed hose flange on it rather than the funny clip thing that Peugeot use. So we've got the radiator here on the bench. It's an aftermarket aluminium one of these Chinese jobs. In fact, while we're on the topic of them, I've actually got a radiator that turned up the other day. Before I bought the Nissan's radiator, I thought, oh, we'll give one of these Chinese radiators a go. So I ordered the off-the-shelf Chinese radiator, all aluminium, for a 306, which is listed as being 100% drop-in, fit, ready to go, no messing around required. And that's not the camera focus either. That is the actual shape of the radiator when it arrived. So obviously it's had some serious issues in transit somewhere along the point, but I think it was a bit of a blessing actually because I was able to get a refund on it obviously. But upon actually looking at this thing, you couldn't make it more non-OEM if you tried. The lower radiator fitting has got completely the wrong end on it for either phase 1 or 2/3 radiators, so I've got no idea who designed that, so that wouldn't work anyway. The rad cap is absolutely atrocious, doesn't fit properly, and it's just awful. And they've even managed to cock up the top hose because the actual bore size of the outlet on there is actually too big for a factory 306. I mean, that's not an issue to me, but that is just wrong. So if you're looking to buy one of these cheap, they're really cheap on eBay, aluminium radiators for a 306, don't buy the 306 one because it doesn't fit at all. And if you, well, hopefully you might have a bit more luck and it might turn up square, but as you can see, the kind of impact that must have had to bend it like that is almost unbelievable really. So that was a fail. Anyway, so I bought this Ford one, which is another all aluminium job. So we'll have to see how that one fares. I mean, to be fair, there's not much to go wrong on this one because it doesn't have any fancy fittings and it doesn't have a radiator cap because it's just the 2 end taps and 2 barbed fittings with a bleed pipe on the top. So hopefully it should be okay. We have got one just like this fitted to the, a Fiat version of this fitted to the 305, which has been in there without any major problems. So we're going to have to get this mounted now. We're going to have to make some modifications to it before we start. Obviously it's meant for a Fiesta, not a 306. So these mounting lugs on the back here, they're going to have to get chopped off completely. The nice thing about it actually is it does have pegs on the bottom of it, which according to my measurements are actually going to line up with 2 holes that are already in my bottom cross member, which would be pretty awesome if they do because I won't even have to drill new holes. But if they don't, I'll just have to drill another hole. But we need to find the rubber mounts for that so that that's sitting in rubber and not vibrating or wearing itself out. Hopefully we can keep these top posts here and I'll be able to make some brackets to pick them up so we can get the radiator mounted nice and square. And we've got a new lower hose here. Of course I bought this before I knew I was going to be using a different radiator, thinking it would sort of plug in and all be nice and fresh. The old one was getting pretty manky up around the back here. It's been in and out so many times it was torn and I didn't really fancy risking it. So the radiator's going to have to get fitted in and then we'll sort of plumb it from there. Right, I've got to show as well, we've got the expansion tank fitted on the back of the engine bay there. It's the same tank I was using before, I've just given it a good clean up. If you remember, we had to change to using expansion tank on the last engine because when I fitted the supercharger there was no clearance for the built-in expansion tank on the side of the phase 1 style radiator. So I went away and used a phase 3 radiator and moved my expansion tank over there. I've made the mounts a bit more substantial this time. Before it was kind of bodged in to get it going. So we just put some riv nuts in the side of the car again. And you can just see there's 4 10mm M8 bolts there, just fastening it to the side of the car, so that can then get plumbed in quite tidily from there, hopefully. Right, so just going to cut these flanges, like I said, off the radiator now. They're fairly useless to me. Obviously I used in the Ford, but they're going to be in the way. They overhang the cross member, so they're going to have to come off a minute. Well, as you can see, I got the radiator bolted in now, so it was actually quite a good little fit actually. It's out of a Fiesta. The 2 feet on the bottom of the radiator actually lined up exactly with 2 of the holes already in the cross member, so I didn't actually have to even make a new hole. I did need to raise the feet up slightly, so the radiator sat a little bit higher than it was sort of meant to. But I've managed to use the original 306 rubber mount and also an Audi front mount intercooler out of an A4. They've got these little funny deeper rubber mounts on them. I've used one of them on the right hand side to make the radiator level, because the radiator mounts on the Fiesta radiator don't sit at the same level. So we changed those rubbers around rather than just bodging it in and having it sitting on the bottom like I see all the time, which you don't want to do because it vibrates around and you wear a hole through the radiator. So I've mounted it up on the 2 rubbers again. It's looking quite happy. So what we've gone here for is a much shorter radiator for 2 reasons. So like I said before, because the inlet on the top of the radiator, which is your hose here, when it's using the stock 306 style radiator, the inlet was over here, which is basically pointing straight in the inlet of the turbo, which was hopeless. So we've shortened the radiator up, and it's also going to hopefully allow me to put my air filter straight down off that turbo there. Behind that area there, access to some cooler air, whereas before it was up in the wing there, which really didn't work very well. A, because it was sucking in all the engine air bay, all the air from the engine bay. And also it was just a nightmare getting it in there, because if you imagine the headlight is also there and it's kind of crammed in behind, so it kind of crushed up the air filter and it didn't really have very much room to breathe. So that's how the radiator is going to sit. I just need to make up some brackets now for the top to support it, and then it's going to be time to start plumbing it in. We've just fitted for camera focus, an extra mount there, a piece of aluminium, a piece of steel bracket with a rubber grommet which sits on the peg on the top there. So I've just been working on plumbing this one up now. So the top radiator hose, which comes out the cylinder head on the right hand side, so that's your water return back to the radiator to the hot side. I've got no thermostat on this engine. This is the same as when it was in the MTDI, but I probably didn't explain that. Because I had to sack off there's a big plastic housing that sits on the right hand side of these cylinder heads on the HDIs, which basically contains a thermostat and like a diesel fuel heater thing, heater temperature sensors, and it also brings the return back up from the water pump. I haven't got room for that because it's a huge, great cumbersome thing that gets in the way of the turbos, so we sacked that off on the last engine and just ran a very simple flange, which you saw me assemble in an earlier video, just to give me basically the water pipe to the radiator, also a heater matrix send pipe, and also there's a small air bleed pipe to send the air back to the header tank so it bleeds up nice and easily. So because of that, there was no thermostat anywhere, so we had this external thermostat made up, which I used to run in a similar position before. So the water just comes out, basically goes through a thermostat housing. So that's your bypass pipe is basically that one there, and that's your main flow when your stat's open. So it does the same thing as when it's in the block, it's just you have to sort of pipe it up externally. So you can see I've just been plumbing that up now. Nice and straightforward, out the block into there, and then straight into the radiator. Then the bypass pipe will then come down across and tee into the other radiator hose, which I won't tee into the other radiator hose. It will connect into the fitting that's on the radiator, which isn't in the perfect place, but like I say, because it's a Fiesta radiator, it didn't exactly as we need it, but it's not a problem because we can just send that pipe around the corner there. So that was the top radiator hose pretty much sorted. We got obviously the bleed off the top, the other side of the radiator, which I've You can probably just see it's not actually all fitted up yet, but I've just been mocking that up. It's going to run the back side of the motor, and then it will go into the header tank with a T to tee the air off the thing. So it will self-bleed. It always used to self-bleed. There's no bleed nipples or anything, bleed screws or anything on that, because the header tank is higher than anything else on the system. So all the air will just sort of automatically end up in the header tank, which is ideal. It makes it really easy for purging out. So we're going to work on the lower radiator hose now. So we're going to use a factory 306 item. I've got a new one, but it's a stock pipe which comes off the back of the water pump. There's a plastic fitting on these engines, so that will come round. The main thing we've got to change here, because obviously this radiator doesn't have the special Peugeot flip fit thing on it. So I've cut the end of the radiator hose off, and we're just going to have a 90-degree silicon bend on the lower side of the radiator, which you can just about see. Obviously that needs to be chopped down. I've just pushed it on there to make sure it's the right size. So that'll go in there, snugged in a bit tighter, take a bit off that one, take a bit off that one, and then it'll then be joined into that factory hose, which will then follow the factory clips and everything around the inner wing, and then connect to the water pump at the back. And then that's basically the coolant system sorted out. I just got a couple of heater matrix hoses to sort of tie in at the back there. I've already got the return one back to the water pump, so the other one just needs to get routed around and into the fitting that I've got in the front here. So we'll get all that lot together, and then the cooling system will be pretty much finished to the point where I would be able to put water in it. Right, so I'm down the back of the engine now, just kind of sort of tidy up all the last of the plumbing and stuff that we've got going on down there to finish that up. And before I finish the radiator hose that goes to that expansion tank, I wanted to just get the few connections on the manifold sorted, because they're going to be a little bit more difficult to get to once we plumb that in. So obviously I've just got that wideband sensor to screw in there. That won't take 2 minutes. So I'm just going to make up a pipe now for the manifold pressure, exhaust manifold pressure. So the way that we do that is we take a pressure feed off the manifold before the primary turbo, so as it comes out the back of the head effectively. Now obviously the exhaust gases coming out of there are super hot, so you can't just connect straight into that really and go inside the car to a sort of conventional boost gauge or whatever. Firstly, you're going to need a gauge that reads more than a boost gauge, because your manifold pressures will generally be slightly higher than your boost pressures when it's wide open. So what I do here is I think you saw when I made the manifold, if you can see down there, I welded a brake union flare, female end on the manifold down there. So what I've done in the past, and seems to work fine, I've seen other people doing it the same thing as well, is to basically just have a piece of brake line, bend it into sort of a bit of a heat sink kind of idea to help dissipate the heat. Obviously we just put the brake unit on one end, and I just put a flare on the other end so that we can put a silicone hose on it, and I found that to work absolutely fine. I've never had any problems with anything melting. So that will then get mounted behind the engine. I'll bend that down, right down out the way, so you can't really even see it, and then the other end will just poke up, and I'll be able to hook up that to a silicone, which will then go up to the gauge that's on the dash. So you can see I've got that fitted there now, so just see it coming out the manifold. Obviously it goes through the coils just to help cool off the air, cool off the gas, and then into a piece of silicone which goes through the bulkhead into the gauge. Well, I can't really quite remember where we got to with the cooling system, but I know I think I was still waiting for some bits when we last did the video. So I have now just completed that. It's all plumbed up now and effectively ready to take water. So I won't actually put any water in it for a minute, just because I don't really want to fill the whole thing up with water now and find that the head's breached or something, and have the bores and everything full up of water for the next couple of months. So I'm just going to leave it dry for the time being, but we got all the expansion tank plumbed up in the back there now. So it's basically just feeding from the top there. Obviously the heater matrix returns there as well, because that's just the factory easy way of doing it. And the two air bleeds off the cylinder head and the radiator obviously then return to the top of the expansion tank. And it generally self-bleeds when you have that back there. You just leave the cap off, run it up, and the air purges out all by itself. So we've got the thermostat housing in the external thing that we made up for the last engine on the front here, just because we've done away with that everywhere else. The temperature sensor is tapped into this little adapter that's connecting from the engine block to the front hose there. Bypass pipe obviously comes down and tees in and is just hooked into the front of the rad down the bottom there. And the rest of it is virtually factory, to be fair. So you can see we've just got the intercooler mocked up there now. It's got to come off again yet, because the oil cooler's got to go in behind it. But I just wanted to put it in so I could start mocking up some boost pipes. See, I got the main one on the intake there. Yet to connect up the rest of that, and also yet to connect up the rest of the high pressure side over here. So that's kind of the next project. Can't remember if we covered it either in another video, but you can see you've got the air filter in there now. So it's got that big 90-degree silicone on the blower there. It just intakes right there, so it's got lots of fresh air coming its way.